This year, ADB has brought together its key corporate performance assessment in a single integrated management report. This is the ADB Results Report. It sets out how the institution is performing against its strategic priorities and where results are being delivered across Asia and the Pacific. It also marks several firsts. Our first report under the new Corporate Results Framework, the first assessment of Strategy 2030 midterm review progress, and the first to provide a more comprehensive view of ADF operations. The results report captures how ADB supported its developing member countries during a period of global uncertainty, while continuing to focus on prosperity, people, and the planet. It shows progress in what we invest in, how we deliver, and the development outcomes we achieve. In 2025, ADB strengthened both sovereign and private sector operations, expanded partnerships, and more deliberately aligned investments with institutional reforms, with clear intention and sharpened focus to deliver outcomes set out in the Strategy 2030 midterm review and our Corporate Results Framework. Overall performance of ADB operations remains broadly stable, but results highlight where we need to adapt, particularly on project sustainability and implementation performance. As ADB scales up, the priority is to ensure that greater financing leads to better outcomes. This requires stronger project readiness, timely course corrections, sustained support across the project cycle, and more differentiated approaches to deliver lasting, measurable development impact. Alongside management reporting, the annual evaluation review provides an independent assessment of recent performance trends in ADB's operations, including sovereign, non-sovereign, and technical assistance operations, as well as country programs. The performance of ADB's sovereign operations has stabilized overall since 2020, with about 2/3 of validated projects rated successful despite lingering post-pandemic pressures, but performance declined in several key infrastructure-related sectors. Addressing persistent weakness in project design and implementation will be essential to strengthen outcomes, especially in sectors that continue to face challenges. The performance of private sector operations was also stable, but at a lower level, with just over half of validated projects rated successful, while ADB's technical assistance performance worsened in recent years. This year, the annual evaluation review theme chapter focused on examining the effectiveness of ADB's strategic approaches and operations for reducing poverty and vulnerability to poverty. The review finds ADB strategies to be adaptive and increasingly focused on poverty and vulnerability reduction, but identifies scope to improve the identification of the poorest and most vulnerable groups, as well as poverty diagnostics and progress benchmarks. The evidence shows overall positive outcomes in expanding income-earning opportunities, but more limited results in human capital development and social protection, particularly for the poorest and most vulnerable. Regarding IED's recommendations from the evaluations, while acceptance by management has remained high, design and implementation of management actions show signs of weakness and require closer inspection. The annual evaluation review reinforces the importance of a sharper operational focus, especially on the key infrastructure-related sectors, which include stronger project design and implementation, as well as enhanced focus on the poorest and most vulnerable to maximize ADB's development impact. Together, these reports provide a comprehensive picture of ADB's performance and its development results. And more importantly, they provide shared evidence that guides improved decision-making for enhancing ADB's operations. This session is about learning from today's performance to inform tomorrow's results. Based on the findings and the lessons, we invite you to engage in the discussion and contribute to how ADB can further strengthen its impact across Asia and the Pacific.
The concept behind what works when we formulated it about 8 years ago was to have a discussion immediately after the DEC committee meeting. And as respect to ADB staff, we bring the report first to ADB staff and discuss it here before we start the dissemination process. So we'd like everybody to be ready with their questions to the panelists or any remarks that you all might have. I've also been informed that I'm blocking the screen, so if you see me ducking, it's nothing else. I'm just trying to ensure that you all can see the screen. And with that, let me introduce our panel today, which is bringing together leadership perspectives from across the institution. We have Emmanuel Jimenez, Director General of the Independent Evaluation Department, offering the independent evaluation perspective. Aman, Director General of Procurement, Portfolio and Financial Management Department. She's at the center of ADB's public sector programming and portfolio performance. Welcome, Aman. Emma Veve, Director General of the Pacific Department, grounding us in the country and regional realities. Welcome, Emma. Safdar Parvez, Deputy Director General of the Strategy, Policy and Partnerships Department, helping connect strategy with institutional direction. Welcome, Safdar. And last but certainly not the least, bringing in the sector's perspective, we have Priyantha Wijayatunga, Senior Director of the Energy Sector Office, bringing deep sector expertise from the energy space. Welcome. And together, this is a panel well placed to move us beyond reflection into a practical conversation on what we can do differently, if not better, going forward. Let's just make things a little more exciting here. So just imagine a situation where all of you, our panelists, were drafting a news release and were asked to draft a headline from your perspective. What would that headline be? This will help us get a sense of what you think was the main theme emerging out of your report as well. So can I come to you first, Aman? What would be your headline?
I think our headline, which we thought about, was Record Commitments, Operational Challenges.
Emma, what is your headline?
Delivering resilience in the Pacific, scaling climate connectivity and essential services for small island states.
Safdar?
We have had strong strategic alignment and stable success rates despite lingering challenges.
Priyantha?
Powering the energy transition at scale, strong energy sector delivery, but sustainability and implementation gaps remain.
Manny?
Stable operational performance overall, but stronger attention needed on underperforming sectors and efforts to reduce poverty.
Now that we have those headlines, Safdar, if I may come to you, and you did point out the positive aspects of the year that was, but at the corporate level, where are the most persistent gaps in results and what do they signal for ADB's direction towards 2030?
Thanks, Saleha. I'll be quite frank. I think we do a very good job in lending money. We must do a better job in delivering and demonstrating development impact. And that to me is the summary of what we are trying to say in the annual results report. You saw that despite COVID-19 and other challenges, we have maintained a relatively stable success rate of our projects. But for us, from the management side, this is no reason for complacency because we feel that these success rates can be further uplifted. So if we are on the average reaching a success rate of about 70%, what does success look like if we were to build on it? Certainly, we are not looking at 100% success rates. We are a development organization. We take risks. We fail sometimes. But having said that, there is still scope to do better. And this year, we are introducing a number of new items, new agendas that we are fairly confident would help move the scale along on development success. We are coming up with a new approach to development impact together with our colleagues in the Economic Research Department. We are placing a great deal of emphasis on decentralization, moving the action closer to the field, empowering country directors, making sure decisions on project implementation, risk management can be taken closer to the field, and results can be delivered more quickly. We are trying to emphasize the whole area of project readiness now. We are coming up with a new facility on project support lending, which for the first time would provide support not only for project readiness, but support to our executing and implementing agencies throughout the project cycle for project implementation, for operations and maintenance, and the like. We are looking at new ways of assessing, measuring, and ensuring sustainability. So there are a number of new things that sort of we are doing. But one thing I'm struck with also is that we have to remember that it is not a question of attribution. Development is always a partnership. ADB finances projects, but the implementation of projects is undertaken by our government counterparts. Have you ever wondered that why do success rates of ADB projects vary so significantly across countries? After all, we are the same staff. We provide the same kind of resources. We have the same business processes. But one country can achieve a success rate of an average of 80%, and another country struggles to even reach 55% success rates. So clearly, there is something more than ADB here, which is at play. And this is really where the whole area of building capacity, working with our government counterparts, our new endeavor of ADBX, as you're aware, we have just announced the first head of ADBX, trying to take a more clear approach to capacity development, because without working directly with our counterparts, we would never achieve the kind of success that we are aiming to do. So I just wanted to give you a flavor of the kind of things that we are now working on in this space, and we need cooperation of all of you there. Thank you.
No, Safdar, all the points well taken. We might come back to some of those points later, but at this moment, let me just turn to Aman. So we spoke about gaps. When those gaps show up in portfolio, what do they look like in practice? Where are the biggest constraints in delivering results at scale?
Thanks. I think to build on what Safdar said, and just again to be blunt, is really, to quote Dickens a little bit, the tale of two things is the difference between processing and implementation. The attention we play at the processing point versus the implementation. So from a portfolio perspective, which monitors implementation quality, that's really where we see some of the issues. Now, two or three things that are particularly problematic, for lack of a better term, is sustainability, as Safdar also mentioned, and particularly in our biggest sectors, the ones that lead on the lending and in terms of that. So for example, some of the statistics I have here, infrastructure sectors continue to face challenges. Sustainability is 53%. Performance also lags, and performance is at about, for water and urban, is 23%. So success rates. So these are really key portfolio indicators that indicate that something is not going well here. And I think, again, to leverage what Safdar was saying, that we're just one hand. It also takes the government and the counterparts. And so these are where it really shows up in portfolio particularly, and we need to kind of do better in terms of dialogue with the countries, in terms of our own attention to it. So I think those are really the key indicators. There's others, of course, but I think mostly what we see as the highlight numbers is sustainability, which is complex because of O&M and also the difficult discussions around that with governments, and the success rates at the end. I think there's aspects of quality embedded in all that.
Right. You spoke about sustainability. I'll just ask you, we all talk about the trade-offs, right? So what are the toughest trade-offs from your perspective when you talk about scale versus quality, speed versus sustainability? And how should ADB navigate it more deliberately, if you have an opinion on that?
I think the key issue with sustainability is the very challenging conversations that have to happen with governments. Because I think sustainability to me is more of a political economy issue than just our own internal issue. It requires to have very difficult conversations with governments about tariffs, about costs, about what is a public good, what the rates should be, and then it has fiscal implications. So if you're heavily subsidizing a water sector, it has fiscal implications. But if we want a project to be sustainable, in 6 years the government changes, their priority changes. And therefore that is then no longer sustainable. And how can we engage in the current environment? Because to kind of tread on political issues is very, very sensitive, understandably. So how do we do that? So to me, sustainability is very important. Our FM colleagues look at that very carefully, and it's been a drumbeat since I kind of came to the ADB that this is not working well. But I think there has to be an inherent understanding that 100% sustainability rating is not achievable. It's not where we should, I mean, it's lovely to have 100% because it's 100%, but what is a rational number to have? But to me, what's most important is that we continue to have that dialogue with countries to help explain why these issues are important, to help them understand the larger implications on their budgets, and to help them understand how if they can set in train some aspects today, the results of that will be 5 to 10 years later. Patience is also required, both internally and on our counterpart side. So to me, that's one of the most important issues. I think it's probably the most challenging issues to address, because frankly, I don't think it's not even 100%. I'm not sure if it's entirely under our control. What's under our control is for us to have certain level of financial covenants attached to our lending, to be robust, and to have the courage to have those conversations. But the rest is really up to our government counterparts.
No, absolutely. Both Safdar and your point on the fact that it's the governments that we are working with, not ADB alone. So a lot of it is on to the governments. But at any point, Manny, any of the panelists want to ask counter questions, please feel free to do that. And Emma, if I may turn to you. Your headline highlights resilience in the Pacific. Where does the evidence show that standard approaches don't work? And what does that tell us about operating in small island and fragile contexts?
Yeah, I think resilience really crosses the whole economy. So we're talking about community resilience, organizational resilience amongst government institutions, private sector resilience, as well as resilience of particular sector investments, and that ties into sustainability issues. What we haven't seen done well is the institutional strengthening, and this goes back to Aman's point, where we're dealing with state-owned enterprises, energy, water supply, telecommunications. Are we bringing forward the reforms and the organizational restructuring and the skills development needed to move forward with these quite complex investments in a sustainable manner, and in a way that will see, them being resilient to fiscal downturns and not losing out and having to step back from maintenance, for example. And I think that has been a real struggle. And as an organisation, we have been much more comfortable preparing projects and coming up with pieces of infrastructure, and less comfortable tying in the reforms that are necessary to make that piece of infrastructure work to the fullest advantage. And I think particularly in the Pacific, this issue, our expectation that government will implement these projects. Well, yes, they can, but it requires an awful lot of scaffolding around government to enable that to happen. Supervising consultants, frequent visits from project team leaders, bringing in the right specialists to supplement government capacity when needed. I think to some degree we're kidding ourselves that government is implementing these projects. They're doing it with a lot of support around them. And we struggle at points where advice to government isn't being taken on board for a whole range of different reasons. And we're seeing the implications in government not making decisions about dealing with non-performing contractors and so forth. So how to move forward on that range of integrated issues, I think, is what is really challenging for the region.
Right. So to take for momentarily taking the attention away from the government and looking at ourselves. I mean, and this is not typical of the Pacific, but taking Pacific in as an example, it cannot be treated as one. In every island has different needs. Every island has a different context. So looking at ourselves, How can ADB be more intentional in adapting its approaches to context? Do you think that applying uniform solutions is something that we can be blamed of?
No, I think we've made an effort, while we might be doing, roads in a lot of countries, they're not done in necessarily exactly the same way in each country. Some countries need more capacity support. Some countries have an industry at hand that can provide these construction services. So everything needs to be tweaked to work in the specific country that it is. But that does require in-depth understanding of the particular sector in that country. And that becomes difficult when you're not doing a road every single year in Kiribati. You might do one a decade. And so that depth of understanding of the capacity of the sector takes time to build and to understand. And the question is, are we giving project team leaders and country teams enough time to build that needed understanding for administration of projects, their implementation to run smoothly?
All right. The last point is an important one. We can dwell on that. Priyantha, but we'll come to you before that. In the energy transition space, we've seen the annual meeting, ambitions are high, but where are we falling short in translating that into consistent, scalable results?
As I am taking it from where Aman stopped, actually. There are a lot of challenges which we face in the energy sector. One of the biggest challenges is actually the political economy back in the countries, where financial sustainability is seriously affected as a result. Hardly any country which we serve is prepared to go with the tariff reforms as we would like to see. That's the biggest issue. And all these countries have elections every 4 or 5 years, and tariff reform is the last one which they really want to take up. That impacts the financial sustainability of the utilities. That obviously have a ripple effect on the investments of the utilities, as a result taking up, improving capacity themselves, and then the innovative new technologies, and all these things are impacted as a result of this financial. That's the biggest challenge. On top of that, of course, the new technologies which you try to concentrate on. As the energy transition gradually takes over and accelerates, new and innovative technologies are coming into the system. For that, obviously, the utilities capacities, the institutional capacities needs to be built, and that takes time. For instance, if you are looking at intermittent renewable energy to be deployed, that absorption capacity of the power system should improve. For that, the grid management will have to improve. The investment will have to come, not only in terms of assets, but also in terms of human resource capacity and the institutions we support. So these are challenges which we need to overcome. So all these challenges come together when it comes to addressing, the issues in the energy sector.
One concrete change, specifically in design implementation or partnerships, that could most improve results in the next few years?
The most important one, as I said, to address the financial sustainability issue. And as a result, not just that, but overall power sector reforms. Most of these countries, actually, frankly, it's us to be blamed. The last decade or so, we have more or less set aside power sector reforms, and we emphasized on investments after investments on various projects, rather than looking at sector reforms in parallel. That has lagged behind overall, and that will help to improve the situation as we move forward. Policy-based loans definitely will help a lot on that.
Policy-based loans will help a lot. All right, with that, let me turn towards Manny. From an evaluation perspective, what needs to change in how ADB learns to make these headlines that you saw more credible by 2030?
Rather than address your question, Saleha, if I could just make some reflections on my colleagues on the panel and what they've said, which might address your question going forward. Just one thing. One is, I'm pretty optimistic, which may sound strange to you coming from an evaluative background from what I've heard for two reasons. One is that, in fact, the performance we see is under very much more challenging circumstances that we might have expected for a couple of reasons. One is, of course, we had the pandemic and all these issues, which really affected implementation a lot. And the fact that it was stable actually gave us some comfort given that. The second thing is, from what I'm hearing, I'm optimistic going forward because we have now owned the problem. I've heard that in Alcoholics Anonymous, the very first step in this multi-step program to improve is to admit and own the problem. And what I'm hearing today is exactly that. So I think that's going to be key. Now, a few reflections, if I might, Saleha,
Absolutely.
on some of the points that have been made. I think, Safdar, your point about development impact, I think, is entirely spot on. And I really hope that that succeeds because it would make our jobs in IED so much easier if that does. A couple of things I think that are challenging going to be is, I think the development impact initiative really stresses first getting our theory of change right. And part of the issue, I think, is to make sure that our theory of change on what we should expect from what we finance to the outcomes that we are promising is really robust. And that's been a challenge, I think, in the past because hope springs eternal, and sometimes we overpromise. And certainly in some of the challenging areas you're dealing with, especially in the Pacific, one of the things is to let's make sure our expectations are aligned with what we can accomplish. The other issue going forward is going to be making sure that the monitoring and evaluation parts of what we do are robust, because in order to get at development impact, then we really need to make sure that we have the data to, at the end of the day, to make sure that we are assessing that properly. The other thing I just wanted to mention is Emma, Aman, and Priyantha all mentioned sustainability as a key issue. And I think you're absolutely correct. Going forward, I think that what this means is that we have to pay more closer attention to diagnostics to make sure that we have a good public expenditure reviews on what governments can afford and what they're likely to be able to afford, and then build that into our project design to make sure that, in fact, we're being realistic on implementation and their ability to sustain the outcomes of these projects.
Absolutely. So in this session, we'll get you all to react to the comments that you're making, just to make it a little more robust before we go to the audience. Aman.
Thanks. I just wanted to speak a little bit about what Manny just said about diagnostics and the actual very good work that's already happening. And again, obviously I'm biased, but between procurement, our financial management, and our public sector management governance colleagues in the sectors group, in the amount of work that they're doing right now at the country level to strengthen not just that, but there's Safdar can speak to the subnational financing group, to kind of really look a little bit more to see, to address these kind of intrinsic systemic issues with our counterparts. So I think there's a lot of work on diagnostics going on. The second point I want to make is about patience. Diagnostics, developing projects, doing PBLs, waiting for the results. You know, what I always tell the team is we start something, but someone else is going to finish it. And we have to be okay with that. And I think that's really where the importance here comes in, is about the patience. And do we have the patience? Priyantha, at one of the events we asked you to speak at, we spoke about that. We have I think Priyantha called it the carrot. We have the money to lend, but do we have the patience to wait for the investment, to have the return on investment, to see it through? Because sometimes that's what's lacking also on our side. Because as Saleha mentioned, we keep talking about government. What about us, ourselves? And I think ourselves also need to look a little bit and say, do we have the patience to do it? Can we not have a really great headline for a year or two while we kind of do diagnostics and get our things, our projects lined up, and then boom, we're out? So I think it's a combination of all those factors. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to say to many that, look, we own the problem, but we don't always agree with ID on the diagnosis or the solutions to the problem. So I think one thing what we are trying to do is that from our side, we are trying to make our best effort to ensure a high quality of our project completion reports that ID then validates, and then that becomes the basis for the validated success rates. So capacity development, management, ownership of the entire process, we are trying to do whatever it takes to uplift the quality, but we also are expecting ID to work closely with us on the updating of the evaluation guidelines so that some of the current misunderstandings that we have with ID in terms of the definition of sustainability, how it must be measured, how it should be evaluated, even looking at issues of effectiveness, issues of how economic rates of returns are estimated. So we have a number of areas where we do need to make joint progress in terms of resolving some of these methodological issues so that both sides are fully clear on the merits and on the measurement of success so that we can then ideally move towards a higher success rate. Thank you.
And then Priyantha.
Yeah, and I think getting the basics right is really important. So aligning the incentives for individuals with these corporate intent to have more of a development impact on the ground. So how can we incentivize staff to take on the implementation of smaller scale projects versus the processing of very large projects, which are viewed to have better career implications? How can we encourage people to spend time living in the field at our RMs and getting real on the ground experience and developing really deep relationships with government? So I think some of these things are critical to helping staff design better projects and implement better projects, but we need to make it happen more frequently.
Excellent. Priyantha. Some very, very excellent points being made here, some of which we are aware of, but I would really love for all of you to react to these when your time comes.
I agree with Aman that we need to have patience in the sectors. When it comes to delivery, sometimes we don't have patience, we want to deliver, but we should have the patience and see the right point at which we should deliver our projects. Sometimes it's not easy, because the demands are so high in these governments. Let's say, please, some or the other disburse 100 million tranche this year because we are in trouble. We sometimes tend to look at the policy conditions a little lightly or try to dilute them and to see an interpretation to show that it's already met. But that patience needs to be there. So diagnostics coming along with patience is very important when it comes to delivery. From delivery viewpoint, that's a very important thing. And of course, we should have the ability to resist, which is not easy when it comes to mission leaders. When you go and talk to some of the highest levels in the government, it's not easy. But you should have the persuasive power to show them that it is good for them, good for us, good for everybody, if you do it at the right time and they take their steps, necessary positive steps forward to make sure that the monies come in time. So carrot and stick will have to go together, but at the same time, we should have patience to do it at the right time.
So, Saleha, you invited us to ask some questions ourselves.
Yes,
certainly. I think all the colleagues raised an excellent point about capacity building and the fact that we need to have a differentiated approach because of the different capacities in our member countries. And Safdar, you said that ADB's response to this is to have ADBX, which I think has a lot of potential. But someone who's come from the World Bank with a long experience with what we used to call Economic Development Institute, which became the World Bank Institute, which then disappeared and may not be coming back. I think this issue of capacity building is a real challenge for organizations like ourselves, because all of us together, all the MDBs, are just a drop in the bucket relative to capacity that's needed. I just wondered if some of you could share some of the experiences that you've had that have been really successful in how we build that capacity. So I do think that's really a key issue going forward.
I think one example that comes readily to mind is because I walked down here with Seville, who mentioned the portfolio teams having their successful project design and implementation workshop in Kazakhstan this year. This is like an annual event that they do, which about 100 folks, I think, from DMCs, EAs, IAs, et cetera. So it's a consistent approach. At least in the PPFD world, there's a lot of effort put in to training our counterparts, whether it's build, proc, and procurement. FM has a step, but that's internal. But there's a lot that we're doing in that world. But the challenge of the capacity building is the minute and I think this is particularly true in the Pacific, Emma, the minute you train someone, they move on to some other job or something better, and they immigrate, do that, which is great. That's also development. So it's not just a one-off. I think that's another thing that requires patience and sustained capacity building. It's not like, I think we talked about this in the Pacific many years ago at some other event. It can't be one and out. It just has to be a consistent intervention, because the minute you train someone's got that skill, they're going to be moving on, perhaps just like we do. And so that has to be understandable. And I think that's where, at least in our shop, that we're making some strong efforts to train and improve capacity through various means.
So sustained capacity building. Would you like to react to?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Capacity building needs to be sustained and repeated when you have changes of staff. I think in the Pacific, the remote locations make it more difficult. Bringing people together takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and it means no one's doing their job while people are away. The capacity is that thin in countries. I think what we're looking at currently is how to build some capacity development international systems. So their own sort of leadership training colleges. How can we build in some basic skills that will benefit our projects and others more broadly there? What can we do through regional universities that are doing master's training, etc.? I think is another way to look at it beyond the sort of project level training to try to sustain that capacity.
Yeah, when it comes to infrastructure projects and energy projects, we always have most of the time piggyback TAs. Of usually transaction TAs, but we always have capacity building embedded as part of these TAs. And on top of that, we have separate capacity building programs actually going on. And as all of you agreed, we have to have that continuously running. It's not a one-off thing. And one of the biggest issues you find in our member countries is that the retention of this capacity. It's not just Pacific. Even if you look at other regions, retention of that capacity, even within the organization, interestingly, you get this capacity and you are moved to some other place. So that's an issue when you find even in bigger utilities. So something that a biggest challenge. Therefore, you have to continuously do it. There is no one-off solution to that.
Safdar, any example in your illustrious career of sustained capacity building?
No, look, I was, until recently, I was based in China. And I think some of the work that we have been doing there on capacity development, particularly on project management, monitoring, evaluation, those types of things. And I think really one of the most impactful trainings that I have seen is when we have invited government officers from other countries to come and visit China and learn the Chinese experience, looking at replication of existing projects and so on. And they have been, so some of that has been extremely successful. But I think what Manny is saying is absolutely true, because it is really an institutional issue, and that is why we are coming up with this idea. Because right now the problem is that we have too many trainings going on. There is lack of consistency. There is lack of quality. Standards are not fixed. Curriculums are not designed. So a project management training in one country means a very different thing in another country. And clearly we need to have some differentiated approaches, but there has to be some degree of standardization as well. And I think this is going to be the challenge for ADBX, that we are transplanting a new body over a lot of existing work that is happening, which will require course correction. And I think this is going to be a small team, so it has to be highly impactful, focus on quality, and try to scale sort of things up in a coordinated way. So I think we are not underestimating the challenges, but once again, the only way this ADBX would succeed if we get the cooperation of our staff members. Remember, in ADBX, we have made a resolve that is not going to be dependent on consultants. We are going to get staff, people like you sitting around here to become master trainers in your own respective areas. Spend some time with us on the ADBX, and let's try to have a homegrown program. And because staff tend to stay on in the institution longer than any consultant might be able to provide services. So that is one element that can build some degree of sustainability in terms of the efforts that we are trying to do. Thank you.
Right, so lots of hope there from ADBX. And with that, let's just go to the audience here and those online. We'd love to hear from you. It might not be a question, but any reflection to any of the comments made here. The team is here with a mic and they can come to you.
Well, thank you very much for the insightful discussion. I think maybe one reflection and one question. One question is, I think when we are evaluating the project sustainability, is always a very complex issue. That's part of the reason like why World Bank doesn't really include it when they're evaluating the project success rate. And no matter how well the guidelines being developed, even we're doing it jointly, but I think exercising the guidelines is also an issue. So how to make sure evaluators can exercise these guidelines in a consistent way, because evaluators always have to make a judgment call because the guidelines on the paper wouldn't be sufficient since the project sustainability issue is such a complex issue. So how IED will make such effort in this regard to make sure that the evaluation will be consistent and then the evaluated results are credible. The second maybe in a reflection is I think we've made so much effort by both teams and to make the report. When the report is done, I think all of us is asking what's next. And I think the most important thing is we would like the operations node departments, sector departments, and RDs really take this report seriously. This is the starting point, not the end point of this exercise, and how they can dive deeper, look at their specific areas and thematic issues, and really come up with some concrete solutions and measuring those progress. And in the next time, and when we get back to the board, and we can say some things are being done, are being considered, and we make some progress. So that is just a reflection on that. Thanks.
Just on the specific question, Golyang, the guidelines are not a secret sauce. They're available to everybody. You're absolutely right. There is judgment that is done. At the same time, that this judgment is exercised by people. We have a very robust quality control within our department that I'm responsible for. So I basically sign off on that. Now, that said, I do think that after 10, 12 years, people may have different interpretations of those guidelines, and that's what we're trying to correct with this joint team, that we're very hopeful will come up with a more meaningful conversation about what exactly it means to interpret these guidelines. So that's what we're doing. We hope to do that throughout this year, and hopefully the new guidelines will be out sometime next year.
On Golyang's second question, I think that's it's very important, and him and I have discussed this, and even Priyantha and I quickly, while we were just chatting, we've discussed this, is in a certain way we, PPFD and perhaps also SPD, are just the messengers. We collate the data, we put it together, we ask for analysis, we put it there. Yet I sit at the board on the hot seat, and Safdar and Manny and everybody. But at the end of the day, the people who, the sectors and the RDs should be there because they're the ones who are most in the driver's seat of this. And so sometimes for me, it feels personally a little disingenuous that I'm sitting there answering questions when in fact I am like a backseat passenger. I mean, I'm somewhere there just pointing things out. So in a way, that's what we're trying to address is ownership. Let me put it that way, ownership. And I think PPFD and SPD, SPD a little, from policy perspective, obviously, but we are the reporters, and we are, the ownership lies with operations, core operations. And then the other thing we also talk about is, and we've already started brainstorming about next year, what does this look like next year for lessons learned while they're fresh, is who is all reading this report and absorbing this report. These reports come out at a time when everyone is quite busy. They all come out one at a time. We did, there's one less report this year than there was last year. But who's committing the time to read it all to the end or even make it through the executive summary? And that's something in the way we consume information now is maybe not a 60, 70-page report. That's not how we, perhaps sadly, in the attention deficit world that we live in. So those are things we struggle with because at the end of the day, we go through a lot of this work and so much of this is so relevant for our work and development, but are the right people paying attention? And then will these lessons be forgotten about next month? And we're going to wake up again around November, December, when we need to start putting all this together again and go, oh, wait a minute, hold on a second. What happened? So we know what we struggle with, how do we keep the momentum during the year and the attention of the owners of the processes, of the implementers, et cetera, on this topic? Because otherwise the effort that we put into it is we want to see results from this effort and not just another report that people file away. And, so I think those are the challenges we think about.
Thank you. There's one online question from Syed Jahangir Ali. Question is, how is ADB ensuring that there is collaboration, especially when it comes to results and development impacts and theory of change internally and in collaboration with other MDBs, now that World Bank CRF has been revised?
Yes, Jahangir, certainly I think there is a lot of cooperation, collaboration going on. Within ADB, we have a working group or a steering committee on development impact that the chief economist Albert and I co-chair, and that involves presence from all the concerned departments. ERDI has also is outposting a number of sector economists to the various sectors to help them get on with the theory of change and with the development impact work. So it has to be a collaborative effort, and much of the action actually has to be within the sector departments, supported by the regional departments, and departments like ERDI can provide guidance, and SPD is there to ensure high-level management support. So it is very much a collaborative effort. And we are working very closely with our MDBs partners, particularly the World Bank. And there are regular conversations, around the spring meetings, the annual meetings, and also with the other development partners. There is a lot of joint effort in terms of trying to define indicators, particularly on job measurement, for example. And you mentioned the World Bank's CRF, but we are also going to be revising our own corporate results framework in ADB next year. And so in that exercise as well, we plan to be fully consultative with our development partners. Thank you.
So don't put the mic away. There's another question for you from Zainab Saeed, which it is for you, but anybody can answer. The question from Zainab Saeed says, Safdar talked about implementation support for upcoming projects for the IAs and the EAs. In SPD, is SPD considering anything for already approved ongoing projects?
Well, absolutely. So I think what we are looking at, and this facility is still being designed, but the idea is that a country can borrow from ADB to set up a project support lending facility, which can then support projects which are in the pipeline, which are going to be implemented, but also projects that are already ongoing, since the idea is that we will also be providing support for project implementation. So both sets of countries and projects could be covered. Thank you.
Just to complement what Safdar mentioned on collaboration across MDBs, just as ADB is collaborating ex ante and ongoing projects and programs on development impact, the evaluation community of the MDBs also belong to what we call an evaluation cooperation group that we meet regularly. In fact, the last meeting was here in Manila a few months ago, in which we make sure that we are coordinated in our approach to assessing projects. In fact, this year we're actually looking at revising what we call the good practice guidelines for validating and evaluating investment projects, very much aligned with what we're doing here internally. So the kind of issues, Golang, that you mentioned earlier are the same issues that actually go across all the other MDBs, and our guidelines are very similar to all the others.
Thank you very much, Vani. And it's time to bring the session to an end. Some very, very excellent points made here, and in no particular order, Safdar's point about working together with ID on updating guidelines, the issue of about political economy, which almost all the panelists echoed, issue of sustainability, specifically capacity building and making it sustainable, capacity of staff, time for the staff, M&E, and patience. So we would like to end this session with that, but before we go, since we started with headlines, maybe we can end with headlines too. But this time round, we are going to see what headlines in 2030 might look like.
IED agrees with management that ADB has really improved its operational performance and is ready to tackle the future here in the region.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. That was a very, very healthy discussion, very frank, and there are a lot of takeaways from here for the staff and for IED, for operations, all of us. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.